The human body can keep secrets long after the heart stops beating. But some bodies hold mysteries so deep, so meticulously layered, that even decades of forensic science, intelligence agencies, and historical research cannot pry them open. On the quiet sands of Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia, a man was found lying with his back against a seawall, his legs neatly crossed and his head gently tilted, almost as if he had fallen asleep under the rising sun. But he wasn't sleeping, and nothing about him was ordinary. No identifying documents, no matching fingerprints in any national database, no cause of death. No missing persons report that fit his description. Only one clue would emerge hidden deep within the folds of his clothes, a tiny rolled scrap of paper torn from a rare book of Persian poetry. Only 2 words were printed on it. Tamám Shud is finished. Today, in the cold, investigative light of Dark Curiosity Hub, we revisit the real case that has baffled detectives, cryptographers, medical examiners, and intelligence agencies for over 7 decades. This is the story of the Somerton Man, a riddle written on flesh, a cipher carved into time, a mystery that refuses to die. The first morning of December 1st, 1948, began quietly over Somerton Beach. A pale orange smear of sunrise crept across the sky, casting thin ribbons of light over the tide as it rolled in, slow and heavy. The air was cold enough to sting the skin, but gentle, the kind of soft seaside chill that arrives before summer truly asserts itself. At around 6:30 a.m., 2 apprentice jockeys guided their horses along the upper edge of the sand. They noticed a man sitting upright against the stone seawall, a man in a neatly pressed brown suit, polished shoes, and a tie knotted with meticulous care. His legs were extended, ankles crossed casually, like someone simply resting after a long night. One of the boys muttered something about him being drunk, and the pair continued riding without a second glance. For the next hour, several beachgoers passed him, a couple walking their dog, a man gathering seaweed along the tide line, a group of school children messing about near the seawall. Each of them glanced, hesitated for the briefest moment, then continued on. Something about the man looked peaceful. Too peaceful. It wasn't until nearly 7 a.m., when a husband and wife strolling the beach stopped beside him, that the truth surfaced. The woman leaned forward, noticing the unnatural stillness of his chest. His skin was cool. His eyes were shut, but not softly, tightly, as though frozen mid. The corners of his mouth curved just slightly upward, giving him an expression that detectives would later describe as a half-smile, unsettling in its calmness. Her voice trembled. "He's not breathing." When police arrived, they found the scene almost unnervingly undisturbed. No sign of a struggle, no drag marks, no footprints that suggested anyone else had been near him overnight. His suit was crisp, despite the sand beneath him. His shoes were immaculate, too clean for someone who had supposedly walked across a beach. The first responders searched his pockets with gloved hands. They found a packet of Army Club cigarettes containing a different, more expensive brand inside a used bus ticket, an unused second-class train ticket, a comb, a packet of chewing gum, a box of but nothing at all to identify who he was. At the Royal Adelaide Hospital, Dr. John Barclay Bennett examined the body. He estimated the man to be in his early 40s, physically fit, with well-defined calves and unusually strong shoulders. His hands were soft, suggesting he wasn't a laborer. His dental records matched no one in the country. Then Bennett found something unsettling. The spleen was 3 times its normal size. His stomach contained blood. His organs showed signs of acute poisoning. Yet no poison was detected in any chemical analysis. It was a death with no cause, a corpse with no identity, and an investigation with no starting point. Detectives photographed the man's face, hoping someone might recognize him. Adelaide newspapers published the images. Families of missing persons came forward, only to be ruled out one by one. The man didn't match any military records. His fingerprints didn't appear in Australia, the UK, the US, or any Commonwealth nation. He was a ghost, wearing a suit. Then, on January 12, 1949, a railway employee discovered an unclaimed suitcase stored in locker 52 at the Adelaide railway station, left there the day before the Somerton Man died. Police rushed to inspect it. Inside, they found a spool of bright orange thread not sold anywhere in Australia, a shaving brush, a modified table knife, sharpened by hand, a stenciling brush, typically used by merchant seamen. Several items of clothing with all labels removed, other clothes marked with names none, of which matched each other, a coat tailored using American feather stitching. Uncommon in Australia, everything inside the suitcase suggested anonymity and intentionally obscured identity. But the truth didn't emerge until days later, when investigators re-examined the man's trousers and discovered something everyone had overlooked: a hidden pocket. Hand-sewn, invisible, unless you knew exactly where to feel. Inside that pocket lay a tiny, tightly rolled scrap of paper. Detective Leanne unwrote it with tweezers. Printed on it, in delicate Persian typeface, were 2 words torn from the final page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam: Tamám Shud is finished. Those 2 words, poetic cryptic, would ignite the most mysterious chapter of the entire investigation, pulling police into a world of codes, secret books, Cold War, and a woman who may have known far more than she ever admitted. The scrap of paper changed everything. Detectives quickly learned that Tamám Shud did not come from an ordinary book. It came from a specific translation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, published by Whitcomb and Toombs, a version already rare in 1948. More importantly, the words appeared only on the final page, acting almost like a closing line, a poetic signature that life itself had concluded. The meaning was chilling, but what investigators needed was something practical. Which copy had this scrap been torn from? Newspapers published the mysterious words, urging anyone who owned a similar book to check if a page had been ripped out. For weeks, nothing happened. But in July of 1949, more than half a year after the man's death, there was a break. A man walked into the Adelaide Police Department carrying a weathered, sun-bleached copy of the Rubaiyat. He explained that sometime the previous December he had found the book tossed into the back seat of his car, which he had accidentally left unlocked near Somerton Beach. At the time, he assumed it was discarded trash, but when he read the newspaper appeal, something gnawed at him. Detectives flipped through the book. On the final page, a torn, jagged edge sat exactly where Tamám Shud should have been. This was the book. For the first time since the body was discovered, investigators were holding something that had unquestionably belonged to the Somerton Man. But this book held far more than a missing phrase. On its back cover, nearly invisible, unless angled toward a strong light, was a faint pencil impression. A series of capital letters, arranged in lines letters, that formed no recognizable words. Akuta police carefully examined the markings. Argoababd MLIAOI. Tutanpanit MLIABOIA QCADM SAMS cab cryptographers from Naval Intelligence studied the sequence. They concluded it was not random. It held structure patterns, repeated sequences, but no one could break it. Some believed the code was a cipher used in covert operations. Others argued it was an acronym written by someone trying to compress meaningful sentences into letters. A few suspected it could have been a personal, intimate message only one other person in the world would understand. But the most unnerving theory came from a cryptographer assigned to the case. He concluded that the code bore characteristics of a message written by someone accustomed to structured encryption, the kind used by operatives during wartime. For a moment, the case looked as though it was drifting into the fog of espionage. Yet the book held one more revelation. A phone number? Written faintly on the inside rear cover. Detectives traced the number to a young nurse living in the suburb of Glenelg, only a short walk from where the Somerton Man had died. Her name would later be obscured in police records, replaced with the pseudonym Jess. Even today, her identity is used cautiously out of respect for surviving family members who insist she had nothing to do with the man's death. But in 1949, when police knocked on her door, her reaction left a permanent imprint on the investigation. She answered calmly until the detectives showed her the book. Her face drained of color. She swayed slightly, as though dizzy. She refused to take the book in her hands. And when they showed her the plaster-cast mask of the dead man's Masquerade after his embalming, she had reportedly looked ready to faint. Still, she insisted she didn't know him. Investigators did not believe her. Her connection to the book was undeniable. Her reaction to the man's image was emotional, and her address placed her almost at the epicenter of the case. She admitted that years earlier she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man she once knew, a man named Alf Boxall, who, like many during the war, had served in military intelligence. Police tracked Boxall down, expecting to find a corpse. Instead, they found him alive and well, holding the exact copy of the book she had given him, its final page, fully intact. So if Boxall was alive, if her book remained untouched, and if she still reacted with visible shock, who, then, was the Somerton Man? For a moment, investigators felt the case slipping from their fingers again until a small detail in the book offered one more thread to pull. The back of the book carried indentations not only from the code, but also from a series of numbers that appeared to belong to a local bank account, one that had been closed years earlier under circumstances the bank refused to discuss publicly. It seemed that everywhere they looked, the Somerton Man's trail led deeper into That same week, investigators received another tip. A neighbor of the nurse claimed that a strange man had been seen watching her house around the time of the Somerton Man's death. He never knocked, never spoke, only stood across the street at odd hours, staring toward her window. And then one day, he simply vanished. The weight of suspicion was shifting, quietly and inevitably, toward the idea that the Somerton Man had not washed up in Adelaide by chance. He had come for a reason. Possibly for a person, or possibly because he was running from something. Before anyone could decide which theory held the truth, the autopsy report resurfaced, this time under deeper scrutiny. The medical examiners noted something unusual. The man's pupils were wide, almost fixed. His spleen was massively enlarged. His liver and stomach were congested with blood. Yet no poison, none whatsoever, could be detected. It was the kind of death consistent with rare, untraceable toxins, substances more likely to be used by intelligence agencies than civilians. By the end of 1949, police, cryptographers, and military consultants were privately divided into two camps. Those who believed the Somerton Man was a spy, those who believed he was an ordinary man caught in something extraordinary. But the truth, wrapped in shadows and silence, remained just out of reach. If you are enjoying these true mysteries, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to follow all our stories. As the investigation deepened, the quiet suburb of Glenelg became the gravitational center of the case. The nurse Justin lived only a short walk from where the Somerton Man had been found. Her home sat on a peaceful residential street, framed by low hedges and a narrow brick path that led to a weathered wooden door. From the outside, it appeared ordinary, but detectives believed that whatever truth the Somerton Man carried with him, whatever final sentence was implied by Tamám Shud, it passed dangerously close to her life. The interview with her had been unsettling. It wasn't only that she reacted strongly to the plaster cast of the dead man's face. It was the kind of reaction she had. According to Detective Sergeant Lean, her expression was not one of shock, but of recognition, an expression that flickered between horror, guilt, and something undefinable, something human and fragile. Yet she insisted she had no idea who he was. Her denial did not quiet suspicion. Instead, it amplified it. Detectives continued examining her life, but carefully. She was a respected nurse with a young child, and there was no evidence linking her to any crime. Still, her past held fragments of interest. Years earlier, she had worked as a nurse during World War II, tending wounded soldiers. She had met many men during that period, some briefly, some more intimately. One of those men was Alf Boxall, the former intelligence officer she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat. But Boxall, alive and healthy, was not the man from the beach, which left a chilling possibility. There may have been another man she had given the book to. One she had never spoken of, one she refused to acknowledge, even decades later. And then there was her son. Detectives never pursued the detail publicly. But many years later, researchers and forensic artists studying photographs of both the Somerton Man and Justin's son noted something peculiar. A shared anatomical feature, hypodontia, a rare congenital condition involving missing lateral inset, combined with a similarly shaped jawline The resemblance sparked whispers of a biological connection. Did she know the Somerton Man personally? Was he the father of her child? Had he come to see her that night? No one could answer these questions, not in 1948, not in the decades that followed. Yet, while detectives grappled with personal theories, another unsettling detail emerged. The witness account of a man seen standing outside J's home in the days before and after the Somerton Man's death, always at night, always watching. No one ever identified him. No one ever saw him again. The investigators were now entangled in a web, connecting a dead man, a nurse who trembled at his image, a cryptic message carved in faint pencil strokes, and a mysterious book that had somehow traveled from her past into the Somerton Man's final days. But the mystery would deepen even further when authorities allowed the body to undergo one of the most haunting procedures in forensic history. A full-body plaster cast a death mask to preserve his features before burial. When the mold hardened and the cast was lifted, the Somerton Man's face emerged in a ghostly, frozen stillness. His expression remained calm, almost serene, but the eyes, though shut, eyes held attention beneath the lids, a strain invisible to most, but unmistakable to those who had studied sudden, painful deaths. Detectives examined the cast for clues. No signs of bruising, no needle marks, no trauma, no contusions inside the mouth, no fractures. They were looking at a man who had died quietly, efficiently, and almost certainly, intentionally, either by his own hand or someone else's. Body was eventually buried in Adelaide's West Terrace Cemetery, his grave unmarked for years, but investigators kept the cast, storing it like a centerpiece of a puzzle without edges. A puzzle that refused to reveal its picture. Shortly after the burial, the file on the Somerton Man was quietly transferred into a new Category 1, not spoken about openly. It wasn't classified, not officially, but it was no longer treated as a conventional unsolved case. There were too many unanswered questions, too many connections hinted at but never confirmed, too many shadows cast by the Cold War, by intelligence agencies, by the strange chemistry of poisons that leave no trace. The Somerton Man had become a ghost in more ways than one, his origins erased, his death invisible, his purpose swallowed by silence. And yet, the story wasn't over. In ways no detective in 1948 could have predicted, the case would continue generating new leads well into the modern era. H.D. Scoberty, illuminating one corner of the mystery while casting a new shadow elsewhere. For in the decades that followed, the Somerton Man's identity would become a battlefield for scientists, cryptographers, genealogists, and conspiracy theorists alike. The truth, it seemed, was both closer and farther than anyone realized. As decades passed, the Somerton Man slipped from an active police file into a ghost story wrapped in official silence. But the world refused to let him rest. Every few years, a journalist, a cryptographer, an amateur sleuth, or a retired detective would resurrect the case, pulling threads that stretched across continents. One of the most persistent threads led to poison, specifically rare cardiac glycosides known for inducing sudden, quiet death without leaving a trace, substances used in espionage, substances nearly impossible to detect in 1948. Researchers revisiting the autopsy noted the enlarged spleen, congested organs, and the relaxed, almost peaceful posture of the body. These signs aligned with certain glycosides that could kill within hours, leaving no chemical residue detectable with the technology of the era. If someone wanted a man to die silently and leave no evidence, this was one way. But who would want that? And why here on a quiet Australian beach, far from the strategic centers of the early Cold War? More clues surfaced when investigators dug deeper into shipping and military records. Glenelg, the suburb where the nurse lived, had been home to several wireless communication units during World War II, units involved in signal interception, encryption, and message analysis. Some believed it was also a place where foreign intelligence occasionally operated. And then there was the Ruba yacht itself. That particular edition, Whitcomb and Toombs, was so rare that bibliographers could find almost no copies printed with the same formatting. How had one ended up in the hands of a dying man? Why had its final words been cut out and hidden in a secret pocket? Was it a final message to someone? A code known only between two people? A symbolic gesture by someone preparing for death? Theories multiplied. Some suggested the Somerton Man was a spy, perhaps Soviet, perhaps British, perhaps a courier whose mission had collapsed around him. Others believed he was the victim of a more intimate tragedy, a failed romance, a child he never met, a life that closed around him until escape was no longer possible. But one of the most haunting developments came from the plaster cast, the death mask. For years, it rested in police storage, gathering dust. Then, decades later, it was examined under improved lighting, revealing subtle details previously overlooked. Faint stress lines near the jaw, a slight tension around the mouth. The expression was serene, yes, but the underlying muscles betrayed something else. A moment of awareness, a moment of pain, a moment when the body realized the end was coming. The cast traveled to museums, forensic labs, and private research. Some examined it like archaeologists study a relic. Others stared into the frozen face, searching for a story the lips would never tell. Then the digital age arrived. Photographs of the body, the suitcase, the scrap of paper, the code all resurfaced online. Enthusiasts across the world began analyzing the letters. Patterns were noted. Frequency structures were identified. Some claimed to see a poetic rhythm consistent with the rubaiyat itself. Others believed the letters encoded names, locations, or clandestine instructions. No one cracked the message. Not fully. Not probably. Yet the greatest breakthrough came not from cryptography, but from genetics. In 2022, after extensive legal battles and years of research, Professor Derek Abbott and genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick completed a comprehensive DNA analysis using hair preserved from the plaster cast. Their findings pointed to a man named Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne. For the first time in 70 years, the Somerton Man had a name, at least a probable one. But even with this identity, the puzzle did not solve itself. Webb had disappeared from records in the mid-1940s. There were no confirmed sightings of him afterward. No clear reason he would travel to Adelaide. No explanation for the code, the book, the hidden pocket, the erased labels, the poisoned organs, and no explanation for the nurse's trembling reaction in 1949. Science had given him a name, but not a story. The shadows remained. The secrets endured. The beach, the book, the nurse, the suitcase. Each piece held meaning, but none of them fit together neatly. Not yet. And as the modern investigation seemed to close around the truth, the case suddenly widened again, stretching back into earlier decades, deeper into unanswered questions, further into realms most mysteries never reach. Even with a modern identification, investigators, professional and amateur alike, continued searching for the reason behind Webb's fate. Why would an electrical engineer with no known criminal background end up dead on a beach hundreds of miles from home? Why carry a coded message? Why tear the final words from a philosophical manuscript about fate and endings? And why die alone, in silence, under the fading glow of a cold Australian dawn? Some researchers turned to Webb's personal life. Records hinted at a troubled marriage that had deteriorated sharply. His wife filed for maintenance payments shortly before he vanished from Melbourne. Their separation was contentious, steeped in emotional and legal tension. Some theorists believed Webb may have left Melbourne voluntarily, seeking escape from a life collapsing around him. Others suggested something darker: covert work in electronics during wartime, perhaps with classified implications. Australia, during World War II, hosted secretive operations involving radar technology projects that drew in engineers whose work was never recorded publicly. If Webb had participated in such work, his movements after the war might have intersected with individuals or agencies who preferred to operate without documentation. Still others circled back to the nurse in Glenelg. Her refusal to acknowledge him, despite her clear emotional response, cast a long and lingering shadow. Some believed he had once known her. Others believed he had come to see her one last time. A few theorists suggested she may have known he was coming and that he was already in danger. But the truth, real or imagined, remains buried in silence. Physical evidence continued to support the poisoning theory. The posture of Webb's body, the calm expression, the absence of struggle, all consistent with certain glycoside toxins. The lack of chemical trace was not unusual for 1948. Even today, detection can be difficult. But poisoning does not clarify intent. If it was self-inflicted, why the code? Why the secret pocket? Why the torn scrap from a book only a handful of people owned? Why travel so far, just to die on a beach facing a woman who refused to know him? If it was murder, why no signs of force? Why no witnesses? Why risk poisoning a man in public? If it was espionage, why such a poetic signature? Why such an imperfect cover? Why leave a trail of clues that seemed at once meaningful and useless? The Somerton Man exists in a space between worlds, the personal and the political, the intimate and the clandestine, the tragic and the opera. His story is both grounded in fact and suspended in ambiguity. He remains, even today, an unanswered question carved into the fabric of Australian history. On his grave, a small plaque now reads, "Here lies the unknown man found at Somerton Beach." Below it, a second inscription added decades later, "Somerton Man, now known as Carl Webb," and yet the name does not close the case, for the name is only the beginning. The truth, his purpose, his final journey, the meaning behind Tamám Shud that remains drifting somewhere between the tide and the darkening sky over Somerton Beach. Perhaps he carried his secrets willingly. Perhaps he was silenced. Perhaps he came seeking someone who could not face him. Or perhaps the truth lies in the coded letters written faintly on the back of a book found abandoned in a stranger's car. The Somerton Man leaves behind the most haunting kind of mystery, one where every clue is real, and none of them agree. More than 70 years have passed since the Somerton Man sat down against a seawall at the edge of a cold Australian dawn and closed his eyes forever. Science has given him a name, but not a story. Investigators have given him theories, but not answers. The world has given him fascination, but not peace. This mystery lives because it resists closure. It is a puzzle with too many edges missing, a code with no agreed key, a man with no past we can prove. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments about a topic you are curious about and would like to know more about. Until the next mystery.